We can get started, I believe. I see all friends are here. So welcome, everyone. My name is Defne Sadıklar Arslan. I am the Turkey director at the Atlantic Council. And dear guests, colleagues, and friends, thank you all for joining us to launch the Atlantic Council in Turkey, Turkish Policy Quarterly special issue, Turkey's Energy Nexus, Discoveries and Developments. This special issue is an initiative of the Atlantic Council in Turkey program, which the Atlantic Council launched earlier this year to increase our engagement with Turkey and the surrounding region in response to an increasingly challenging geopolitical and economic environment. I would like to thank to our partners, without whose support this event and issue would not be possible. I am delighted to be joined today by the TPQ's Editor-in-Chief Süreyya Marta Köprülü. It was a great pleasure to cooperate closely with TPQ to publish this special issue. Thank you, Süreyya, and your team for this important and timely outcome. I would also like to thank my colleagues at the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center for their wonderful contributions. Very shortly, we will hear from Global Energy Center founding chairman, Ambassador Morningstar, who we are very fortunate to have moderating our panel today. I also look forward to hearing from Energy Center's non-resident senior fellow Brenda Sheffer and Deputy Director David Livingston. Promoting a positive and productive bilateral agenda in the U.S.-Turkey relations is at the core of our mission. And it was our great honor and privilege to feature contributions from both the U.S. and Turkish governments in this issue. My good friend, Deputy Assistant Secretary Sandra Altkirk, is here today with us to talk about her article. Very lucky to have her here today. Thank you. Thank you very much. One of our distinguished contributors, Alparslan Bayraktar, Deputy Minister at the Turkish Energy Ministry, unfortunately could not make it here today, but we are very fortunate to have Ambassador Mithat Rende, former Turkish ambassador to OECD and one of the key Turkish energy experts in Turkey. Thank you for being here today. Energy is lifeblood of every modern economy, and for a country like Turkey, with a few domestic fossil fuels of its own, securing an affordable and reliable source of energy is always an issue, especially as Turkey's energy demand growth has been the highest in the OECD over the past 15 years. Turkey is pursuing a policy of boosting domestic energy production, including through renewables, an area in which Turkey has great potential, and diversifying sources by bringing in gas from Caspian Basin through the newly inaugurated Trans-Anatolian Pipeline, TANAP. Turkey is also well poised to take advantage of global trends such as the growth of liquid natural gas, which is an area I believe that the US and Turkey can cooperate. There's a lot to cover today, so please, without further delay, allow me to welcome Süreyya to the podium. Süreyya, floor is yours, and thank you again.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Defne, for framing the discussion and for introducing me. As Defne mentioned, I'm Süreyya Köprülü, and as editor-in-chief of TPQ, it's a pleasure to be with all of you today here in DC. And as some of you know, Turkish Policy Quarterly was established back in 2002 as an independent foreign policy journal fostering original thinking and analytical policy debates on Turkey and its neighborhood. And since then, the journal has had to navigate political fluctuations while maintaining its independence, which is something we're very proud of. A critical component of the journal's sustainability is partnerships with leading international think tanks like Atlantic Council on special editions of TPQ. And the fall 2018 issue in front of you is a reflection of that. And we're very happy to have collaborated with Atlantic Council in Turkey and to have worked closely with Atlantic Council fellows on their articles for this special edition focusing on Turkey's energy prospects, as well as important attendant topics, including energy security, energy efficiency, the role of renewables, and environmental concerns. TPQ is quite rich in content vis-a-vis energy-related topics, and it stretches back to the journal's early years. We also have a tradition of hosting annual roundtables on the energy landscape in Turkey and the region for 5 years running. And in fact, in the early months of 2019, we're hosting a roundtable on this very topic in collaboration with Atlantic Council. So we look forward to welcoming any of you who can attend that event in Turkey. Also, in 2019 onwards, TPQ is going to expand its editorial scope, and we plan to focus more in depth on issues such as cybersecurity and global finance and trade, as well as climate change issues. And so we're very excited about this new chapter, so to speak, in TPQ's development and to informing our stakeholders on these changes, as well as really deepening the cooperation we have with our valuable partners like Atlantic Council. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to our illustrious panel and our moderator, Ambassador Morningstar. Thank you.
Come on up, folks. You're on. Well, I want to welcome everybody, and I want to give particular thanks to Daphne and Soraya, one for their opening remarks, but even more important for, I think this is just a terrific issue, and really appreciate the work that both of you have done, and also the work that Pinar and Grady have done, as well as all of Pinar. Grady's here somewhere. There's Grady. He's the tall person in the back of the room. It really is a great issue with a lot of good articles, and articles by a bunch of people who are actually not on the panel today too. So it's really good, and it's also a pleasure to be joined by 4 illustrious panelists. You all have their bios. They were briefly introduced by Daphne. It's particularly nice to see my old friend Ambassador Rinde, who I met when he was Turkey's ambassador to the OECD. I remember the wonderful dinner you hosted for us back some years ago. And so I think this is going to be a terrific discussion. Before making very brief further introductory remarks, I want to just quickly note to those in the audience and watching via webcast, and hopefully there are some watching via webcast, you can join the conversation by following at AC Istanbul and at AC Global Energy, and use the hashtag AC Turkey. Those who are joining us can ask questions during the Q&A as well, at least on Twitter by using, again, the hashtag AC Turkey. Is that really true? They're going to be able to do that, Gray? I should introduce Gray, who's the mastermind of all of these events. Just very briefly, I've been involved in U.S.-Turkey energy policy going back now for over 20 years, and that I think what's most significant about those past 20 years, in fact, maybe even 23 years, is that energy policy has been a constant in U.S.-Turkey relations. Whatever the ups and downs have been in the relationship over the years, cooperation in the energy sphere has always been there, and it's always been a sustaining part of that relationship. The other thing that I think is tremendously significant is that policy, and our policy with respect to the Caspian, energy resources from the Caspian, energy relationships with Azerbaijan, Georgia, Turkey, and in Europe, have been consistently a bipartisan policy. There aren't that many policies that you can point to that are bipartisan, but this is one, and it's something that's very important something that really, I think, needs to be maintained. The Southern Gas Corridor, obviously very important. Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan was very important. And cooperation in new areas of energy also, which we'll talk about today, are also very important. So I think that's all I would like to say for now with respect to introductory comments, although because I generally can't help myself, I'll probably be interjecting at various points. But what I'll do is I'll start off, just to give you a little bit of a roadmap, and give the panel a bit of a roadmap. I'll start off with Sandra and ask her about U.S. government policy and why it's still important to this administration. And I'll get to the question in a minute. And then Brenda, with respect to her points that she'll want to make on some of the geopolitical issues, particularly East Med. Then I'll go to David to talk about renewables and new technologies, and then finally, but a reason finally, to Ambassador Rinda, who can sort of sum up some as to what Turkey's energy policy is and why some of these new areas of energy also are important to Turkey and why Turkey even cares about renewables and other forms of energy. So, having said that, why don't I start with you, Sandra, and ask you, again, I mentioned this consistent policy with respect to this region. Maybe you could explain where that policy stands in this new administration, in the Energy Bureau, where you're Deputy Assistant Secretary, and explain why it's important to the United States.
Sure. So thank you very much, Ambassador Morningstar. This is a great opportunity to come together with a lot of old friends and to talk a bit about this administration's take on global energy policy, which, as you noted, is a continuation with, I would say, one key change of the bipartisan consensus on the need for global energy security that has prevailed for the past several decades. And I will say the one really big change is that the United States has, over the last 3 to 5 years, transformed itself from simply the world's largest consumer of energy to also one of the world's largest producers of both oil and gas, in addition to a producer of a lot of cutting-edge technologies in the renewable and energy efficiency space. And so so the Trump administration's policy towards energy in the international sphere continues the themes that we've had in the past with promotion of exports. In the past, we focused a lot on services and technologies. We're now also focused on exporting the actual resource itself. Energy security, our energy security policy towards Europe, towards Latin America, Asia, continues pretty much unbroken. And also the focus on the need for energy access. And I think this administration shares a consensus view with previous administrations that a lack of energy, communities that have no electricity, that lack fuel, are breeding grounds for political instability. They're places where terrorist and extreme ideologies can take root. And also, clearly, the people living in those communities are not able to fulfill their economic aspirations to the highest levels. And I think that those sort of 3 areas are the areas that I talked about in my article. They're the 3 areas that focus on the outside world in the current administration's policy. The other 2 areas are much more internally focused. They look at deregulation inside the United States and ensuring that the United States retains cutting-edge R&D and technologies, and so they're much more domestically focused.
Let me ask you more specifically. We've also had, I think, over the past 20 plus years, a consistent policy with respect to Caspian resources and getting those resources out. From an administration standpoint, the Southern Gas Corridor, briefly, why is this so important? I don't know if we have, I know some people maybe, I don't know if there's anybody from BP here today. They certainly work closely with them and other companies. Good. All right, just a little shout out to BP for all the work you've done. And of course we have Yelda from Exxon. I don't know if there are any other companies, but in any event, if you could maybe talk a little bit about why this is so important.
Okay, so the Southern Gas Corridor, it's kind of like the fable of the 5 blind men and the elephant. The beauty of the Southern Gas Corridor is in the eye of the beholder. If you're in Europe, it's a source of a significant amount of new non-Russian gas. If you're in the Caspian, it's a way to take your gas to a market that pays on time and in cash. If you're Turkey, it's proof positive. It's really proof that the aspirations that I remember us discussing when I was in Ankara in 1999 of Turkey being a conduit between the Caspian and the Middle East and Europe, it's proof that concept works. Not to mention bringing a substantial amount of gas to Turkish domestic consumers. From the U.S. perspective, I think we see benefits from all 3 of those dimensions. It's the Southern Gas Corridor is good for the Caspian producers, it's good for Turkey, which is a consumer and a transit state, and it's good for Europe.
I'm going to ask you one more question before going to Brenda, since you mentioned, well, I'll ask, I'm not sure that you mentioned, but you talked in your article about it, which is export promotion. Mm-hmm. And, you know, there's been a lot of talk about how the United States, you mentioned the shale revolution and so forth. On LNG and LNG exports, which this administration has talked a lot about, and I think sometimes gets misunderstood a little bit, but in any event, do you see LNG exports as something that could be going to Turkey in the foreseeable future?
I mean, I think Turkey is clearly positioned to import LNG. Where that LNG comes from is going to depend on market fundamentals. So the United States does not have a state gas company. The U.S. government has no way of directing private companies where they're going to sell their gas. For the last several years, gas prices in Asia have been significantly higher than in Europe or in the United States. A lot of the demand is in Asia. But historically, the United States has sold most of the gas that we export to Latin America. So I think we're still looking to see sort of where U.S. gas will go. But as the United States, and increasingly the United States and also Australia, bring large new volumes of gas onto world markets, our hope is that the gas markets will become more flexible, more freely functioning, less segmented, more like oil markets, and less sort of regionally constrained.
Thank you. Brenda. Brenda Schaefer has had probably as much experience as anybody in the region for many, many years. Academically, also having been involved at different times with SOCAR and other companies. But now you seem to have a major interest and wrote about the Eastern Med and whether or not Eastern Mediterranean resources can become part of this gas corridor going to Europe. I've said in the past, and who better than to quote yourself, I've said in the past, never has there been so much opportunity for so many countries with so many political obstacles as the whole question of Eastern Mediterranean resources. And I feel a little bit the same way about getting those resources to market like I do about the Trans-Caspian gas pipeline, but we can maybe get into that more at some point. But what do you think about the Eastern Med, and what are the how do we turn these possibilities and obstacles into opportunities?
Right, thank you. Well, already, when we think of the Middle East, Eastern Mediterranean, we always think about a place that has a lot of energy abundance. But in actuality, the Eastern Mediterranean countries are actually very electricity poor. Almost every country in the region has blackouts, brownouts, unstable electricity. And when you have unstable electricity, that not only affects urban life, but even basic agriculture, which in the climate of the Eastern Med is completely dependent on water pumps and therefore electricity. So clearly these resources can do a lot to improve electricity supplies in the region. It's clear that they can do a lot. If we've ever talked about Middle East peace, you could think about, okay, holy places maybe we can figure out. Refugees maybe we can figure out. But what about water? That's going to remain, something that really, how can you get over that shortage? And actually, thanks to these gas resources, it's enabled cheaper and cleaner desalination in the region. You're seeing many of the water conflicts really disappearing. They're just a matter of price. So in that sense, these resources already have provided a lot of benefits to the region. On the other hand, and I think also something that I hope will be renewed and discuss this in the article, that even the energy diplomacy between Turkey and Israel has been very important. So at a time when often rhetoric and actuality, there's a big disconnect. If you think, for instance, how extensive the trade is, for instance, between Turkey and Israel, the amount of tourism, the amount of ties between peoples, yet often on the political level, there's very negative rhetoric. I think continued meeting to discuss energy cooperation, that energy diplomacy is an important signal to the publics in Turkey and the publics in Israel. On the other hand, I think we tend to exaggerate the role of energy resources in bringing peace. And Ambassador Morningstar, you dealt with this during the Southern Gas Corridor. I remember giving congressional testimony and hearing, why shouldn't Azerbaijan build the BTC through Armenia and there'd be peace, and how is that mechanism going to work? When you have mines, you have refugees, you have snipers, and but suddenly BP's going to come in with a pipeline. It just doesn't work. And actually, there's probably, if we look statistically, there's higher propensity to conflict when there's major oil and gas resources versus a higher propensity to peace. And we don't really have one precedent in the international system where the lure of oil and gas trade overcame major issues like borders, like security, like refugees. So we shouldn't overburden the gas trade. It can do a lot of good things. It can't do everything. But again, having those linkages like between Turkey and Israel, I think, can be useful. It can support existing peace, but I don't think that oil and gas trade can create peace. Again, we don't have any precedent of a peace pipeline. You see the same exaggeration, I think, in the East Med, Middle East, we're good at exaggeration. But with gas hubs, every country in the region wants to be a hub. Bulgaria, Cyprus, Israel, Egypt, Turkey. And what's the big benefit? You basically, you import a lot of uncontracted gas, you have big storage facilities, fine. This is not a major geopolitical shift. Maybe even what Turkey, for instance, already is as a transit state, that's probably, as much geopolitical significance as you get. Actually having a hub, I don't see the big addition to that.
Do you think, is there some way to compartmentalize do you think the issues, the commercial issues, and the need for gas, the need for different routes for gas out of the region, and is there any way to separate it from the politics, or are we just going to be endlessly in the political quagmire in dealing with these issues?
I think actually the politics really are not the major impediment. I think, for instance, in the case of Turkey and Israel, I think that the major issue is the price of the gas. Competing with much cheaper gas from Azerbaijan and much cheaper gas from Russia, it's kind of hard with greenfield, deep water production in the East Med, to compete with the prices in the current, Turkish market. I think I hear it from both sides, from senior leadership in Turkey and in Israel, actually an interest in pursuing that. But probably, again, at the end of the day, these are commercial companies that have to make this decision, and this the price being too far away. But something that's kind of interesting is that while there are no peace pipelines, what we have seen in an interesting way is how you can actually be at war and energy flows can continue. So I think it's very interesting, after the downing of a Russian fighter plane, that the gas trade between Russia and Turkey wasn't disrupted. A lot of other trade was, but neither side disrupted the gas trade. And even, war going on between Russia and Ukraine and still the transit being very stable. So it is kind of interesting that, maybe gas doesn't bring peace, but war doesn't necessarily disrupt gas trade when it's important to both sides. Something that's interesting on the geopolitics of gas, we talk today about East Med, we talk about Southern Gas Corridor, but we regularly bring up in these conferences the Turkish Stream, which probably has as much geopolitical significance and maybe as problematic as Nord Stream, for instance, which we mention almost in every conference. But for somehow Turk Stream has gone under the radar and, and maybe does need a lot more higher level attention because it probably has the same, potential implications that Nord Stream has for both Ukraine, for both for circumventing certain transit states, and yet it doesn't get a lot of policy attention here in Washington.
My last comment or question before turning to David and then to Ambassador Rinde. I agree with you on Turkish Stream that it doesn't get enough attention. It is a little bit further, in one sense, a little bit further behind Nord Stream 2, in that nobody's quite sure what happens to the gas once it gets to the borders of Europe, and all that has to be worked out. But it could.
But that would be the reason actually to address it. Maybe right. Nord Stream, you could claim that maybe that horse is already, or I don't want to call anything a horse. So I like horses, but I mean maybe that's too late. But Turk Stream, actually, the route still could be influenced.
Yeah, that may well be. And the last thing on the Eastern Med, at least on this round of questioning, you keep talking about Turkey and Israel. There are more than Turkey and Israel in the region. There are a lot of countries which we could spell, name them all, that are within the region and that have stakes within the region. Do you believe that you could have a gas agreement of some kind between Turkey and Israel without dealing with other political issues within the region and the various other countries that do have, whether it's Lebanon, Greece, Cyprus, whatever?
First thing, just in terms of those regional relations, so actually the pipeline between Israel and Jordan is proceeding, and that seems, within a year will be, concrete accomplishment. Yeah. And I think also to the Palestinian Authority, I think that's something that will be realized, and again, increase prosperity for Jordan, increase prosperity for the Palestinians. Lower pollution, pollution doesn't stop at checkpoints or border points, that pollution is shared in the region. Sure, between Turkey and Israel would probably, it would be highly unlikely that this would be an onshore pipeline, from Israel through Lebanon, Syria although Ambassador Morningstar, that could be a new career activity for you to try to build the Israel-Turkey onshore pipeline through Syria.
Even LNG shipments, or either LNG or an underwater pipeline, any event.
Yeah, but sure, it would be offshore, and then therefore it would have to bring in the issue of either Syria's EEG or Cyprus.
Okay, let's leave it there for now. And
you don't want the job? You don't.
Well, I don't know. I'm in my 5th career. I don't know if I need a 6th one. Anyway, David, let's talk a little bit about what. In fact, you'll be in Istanbul on December 19th for a conference that Daphne and her group are putting together on renewables, on new technologies and the like. What do you see as the opportunities, and then I want to get Ambassador Rinde's comments on it as well. What do you see as the opportunities in these areas? Is this an area that you could see cooperation between the U.S. and Turkey, the EU and Turkey? How do you see it from sitting over here?
Definitely. Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, of course, to Turkish Policy Quarterly, to Atlantic Council in Turkey, our colleagues over there, for doing a terrific job with this report, with this series of articles, and with this event. When you talk about the renewable energy opportunity in Turkey, I mean, it really is that. There are very few opportunities as large in Turkey's energy sector or as large in bilateral relations between the EU and Turkey, between the US and Turkey, I would say, as are presented by the clean energy opportunities in Turkey. Just look at it from an energy security perspective, to take an example. Turkey has had, I mean, incredibly prolific electricity demand growth, energy demand growth over the past several decades, really in a league only with China in terms of the overall pace of growth that we've seen. At the same time, it has tried to keep up with that with incredible investments in electricity generation. So electricity generation over the past decade has grown by 80%. Renewables themselves have grown by 90% over the past decade in Turkey. And yet the country still finds itself in a situation where it has a $55 billion fossil fuel import bill. Over 90% of its consumed oil is imported. Over 90% of its consumed natural gas is imported. Enter the opportunity for renewable energy. Even if Turkey were a relatively resource-poor renewable energy country, there would be a compelling logic to exploring this opportunity. Particularly given Turkey's rich ecosystem of engineering expertise and experience. It just so happens, however, that Turkey has a prolific set of renewable energy resources and indeed a relatively diversified resource base. So you have the second highest sun resource in Europe outside of Spain. It's located in Turkey. You've got prolific wind resource, both onshore wind as well as offshore wind, in the Sea of Marmara, the Aegean Sea, and potentially in the Mediterranean as offshore wind farm technology develops, floating offshore wind farm technology develops, I should say. You also have prolific hydro resources, which have largely already been exploited in Turkey. There's not too much more of a growth story there. But there is very much a growth story in geothermal as well. So you have both base load clean energy resources, renewable resources represented by geothermal. You have intermittent renewables, which are falling in cost rapidly, as represented by wind and by solar. And you have real opportunities here. Just a couple of weeks ago, the Danish consul in Istanbul published some figures where they had calculated that by Turkey fully exploiting what are already economic opportunities to do district heating using geothermal energy, you could cut Turkey's natural gas import bill by 20%. Terrific opportunity. In solar as well, there are obviously incredible investment opportunities for the U.S. For European renewable energy companies. And in fact, there are already some positive signs. So what's most notable in Turkey are these large winner-take-all auctions that they have, where they set aside a zone for renewable energy development, and then they have a large auction to basically, for a single developer, a consortium, to develop 1 gigawatt of wind and 1 gigawatt of solar energy every year. But less prominent, though no less important, are a bunch of quote-unquote unlicensed solar projects of less than 1 megawatt per year, which are being developed in Turkey. And that's where there's terrific potential to do more as well. And just recently, there was an agreement between the EBRD, between the German financial institution KfW, and a few Turkish banks to basically create a pipeline of capital that will develop a lot more of those unlicensed projects. So the logic is there.
Let me turn, based on what you're saying, let me turn to Ambassador Renda. And and I hear what you're saying, David. I mean, and I guess there's a strong commercial argument. Yes, Turkey is dependent on imports. On the other hand, they sure have a lot of imports. I mean, and a lot of potential sources many potential sources for both gas and oil. I mean, gas, for example, you're getting all that gas from Russia. Gas from the Caspian, gas from Iran, potentially gas from KRG. So there's plenty of gas, it seems. Not that hard, even with Iran sanctions, from where Turkey is sitting, to import oil. So let me ask you, what is Turkey's policy with respect to energy and with respect to the future? Why is Turkey looking more now at renewables and at nuclear? Is it purely commercial? Is it concern about climate change? What's driving this policy, and what do you see as the opportunities?
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm pleased to be here. It's an honor for me to be at the Atlantic Council. Thank you, Daphne and Soraya, for having invited me to be here. And I welcome the presence of so many experts and friends and distinguished representatives of the media. Let me start by thanking Ambassador Morningstar wholeheartedly for his personal contributions to the achievement of Turkey in building Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan and the Southern Gas Corridor, and the Southern Corridor, in fact, not only gas. Thank you. You did a lot, and we worked very hard together. Coming back to your question, first of all, I think my friend and the Deputy Energy Minister Alparslan Albayrak, in his well-written article, he widely covered the Turkish energy policy. But I started during the late 90s dealing with energy as a young diplomat. They sent me to London as an additional position. And I was asked to promote Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline and to try to convince the Russian Federation and their representative at the International Maritime Organization that the Bosphorus Strait and the Turkish Straits in general would not be turned into a crude oil pipeline. And we worked for 3 years, and we achieved, we managed to convince the international community that Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan was a first economically viable and environmentally sustainable. And it was the first pipeline with 1 million barrel per day capacity to cross from Azerbaijan to Georgia and Turkey, and to avoid Russian territories first, and it was very important, and then also to bypass the Turkish Strait. So it was a big achievement. And then we continued with the Southern Corridor. As regards Turkish energy policy, first of all, we had basically two components of the policy. First, it was important that we will have a security of supply for Turkey, and geographically you are aware that we are neighboring a tormented region. So for us, the security of supply was so important, and we started with diversification. So it was route diversification of resources and diversification of routes, and then also to tap to the extent possible indigenous resources, and so renewables, coal, and to deal with energy efficiency. So one of the aspects of our energy policy was to deal with our energy supply security, and the second aspect was to also contribute geographically. We were in a good position to contribute to European security of supplies, and this is why, for example, we worked to achieve great infrastructure projects, and it was very well appreciated by the European Union. You might recall that on the 1st of January in 2006, the Russian Federation decided to stop the delivery of gas to Europe through Ukraine. And then on the 4th of January, the energy ministers of the European Union met. They had an extraordinary meeting, and then they decided that Turkey should be the fourth artery. And then they were planning to receive between 80 BCM to 100 BCM per annum through the fourth artery, which was called the fourth artery, the Southern Corridor. And unfortunately, maybe it will take time before we can send 80 BCM to Europe through Turkey. But I think we have achieved a great deal so far. So to contribute to the energy supply security of Europe was also one of the dimensions of the Turkish energy policy. As regards the first part, I think we managed to create a good infrastructure in Turkey, and it is well explained, as I said in the article of Mr. Bayraktar. we have a good capacity in renewables. The reason why we put so much effort and money into renewables, we think that we need to reduce our dependence on imported energy. And it was already stated that the bill is about $50 billion. So, and therefore, I think we we spent about $86 billion so far in the field of renewables and other energy resources. We managed to improve the infrastructure. The grid is improved now in Turkey, and also the gas network. We have also built underground storage capacities. We have 2 FSRUs, and probably the third one will be soon, probably will be commissioned. And also we managed to improve the LNG reception facility. So what we are planning to do from now on is that to expand the LNG reception facilities, because we will need to import more LNG from various places if you think that the US LNG will be able to compete with gas, with pipeline gas. But we need to import LNG, and LNG has a place in our energy basket. So we need a better energy basket, including the nuclear and renewables. Why renewables is also important? Because we are in a decarbonized world now. The global economy is decarbonizing, and therefore we need to have more renewables also to be part of this decarbonization process. But also we will continue to buy LNG. And as regards the Turkish stream, you said rightly that it may be problematic. You said the second line or the first?
Second stream. Yeah.
The second stream. The first stream is important for us because we think that to get directly through Russia, from Russia, through the Black Sea, 15.75 BCM per annum is important for Turkey, because we need to have this amount for Istanbul and the Sea of and the whole Marmara region, in order to meet the growing demand of the region of Marmara. But the second line will cross. We don't know whether the second line will cross through Greece or through Bulgaria. I think it will go through Bulgaria. But I read today that President or Prime Minister Tsipras is on his way tomorrow to Moscow to try to convince President Putin that this line should go through Greece. But then, if it would go through Greece, then we will have too much gas through Greece, and where to? This is why I believe that the second line, which is also important for the Bulgarians and the Serbians and other countries in the Balkans, should go through Bulgaria to Serbia, and from there the Hungarians are interested in receiving also gas, but not as far as Baumgarten, because I understand that from Hungary the Hungarians are planning to cross to take this pipeline to Slovenia, and from Slovenia to northern Italy. So it will be a kind of new Nabucco, in fact. Because you might recall that we worked very hard to establish Nabucco. We tried. It didn't work. And I think that because of the arm twisting exercises that the Azeris had to change their mind, and I think we ended up in Greece, and from Greece to Italy. So this is, I think, at this point I should say about our energy policies. But we believe that we are doing well as regards the diversification, and also as regards with respect to making use of our indigenous resources. We have a great potential of wind, great potential of solar, as it was stated, and we need new investors in Turkey. And it is a lucrative business. I think it's a good business. I hope that the business environment will be improved in the months to come, and we hope that we will have more American foreign direct investors who are interested in our energy sector to do business with their potential Turkish partners.
Thank you, Ambassador. And it sounds like the three arguments for renewables and other new technologies are, one, it's cheaper, two, it releases dependence or mitigates dependence on imports, and third, and probably most important, Turkey is committed to Paris and decarbonizing under the Paris Agreement, so it would be helpful there. Let me ask a question to get response maybe from whoever of you wants to respond. We've sort of tiptoed around the issue of Russia, and Turkey is in an incredibly strategic region. I mentioned, Brenda and I were on a panel the other day, I mentioned that Turkey is the Kentucky of the region. Because if you look at the state of Kentucky, it borders on, what, 11 or 12 states or something like that. And it's the same thing with Turkey, with all of the countries surrounding Turkey. And in that role, or in that strategic space, Turkey has to balance its relationships with, with Russia, with Iran, with Europe, with the United States, setting apart issues, with Syrian refugees and Iraq and so forth and so on, and go on and on with all the issues that Turkey has to deal with. How do you think that can Turkey continue to balance those relationships? And in the case of Russia, in the case of a pipeline like Turkish Stream, is there a risk, do you believe, that Turkish Stream, if it delivers gas to Europe ultimately, can cannibalize the southern gas corridor and make that more difficult, and cannibalize what Exxon's trying to do in Romania if it does ever make a final investment decision in connection with Romania and with the Brua pipeline, potentially to bring that gas out. How does all this play? What concerns, if any, do you have along these lines? I don't know who wants to start, but maybe you ought to start.
Should I start? Yes, thank you. But as I said, that geographically we are really, you see, we are bordering so many countries and a tormented region. In fact, if you look at as of today, we talk about tormented region. It starts from London with the Brexit and the crisis, and then the crisis in France, because in fact the demonstrations are really questioning the leadership of President Macron, and then we have the departing president or Chancellor Merkel, and then if you come to the Western Balkans, then you have a big struggle. The Russians are there, the Chinese are there, and then the European Union felt obliged to introduce a new strategy paper to encourage the 5 Western Balkan countries to do their homework so that they can integrate them. And then you see the Kerch crisis and the strained relations between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. And then on the other side of the map, you have Iran and the sanctions, and also a crisis within the country. Then we have the civil war in Syria with American forces, Turkish forces, Russian forces, Iranian forces, Hezbollah, Israeli air forces. We don't say Israeli forces, but Israeli air forces are also there. And then we have ISIS and YPG and PYD.
This is all the good news.
And then we have Al-Nusra, and you name it. So you have everything. You have warlords. They are fighting during the day and trading during the night. This is the situation in Syria also, and we have 3.5 million Syrian refugees. We're taking care of them with billions of dollars spent so far. And then we have Idlib to be managed, a very sensitive place, and with 2.5 million people. I am from the south, so I understand, I am aware of the situation. I hope that there will be no military solution. We are trying to convince also President Putin and the Syrian regime that there should be no political solution to Idlib. With 2.5 million, we don't need more refugees, and I think Europe is also very aware of this danger. So in such a dangerous environment, Turkey has managed to also secure its infrastructure and also the pipelines from the Caucasus, the pipelines under the Black Sea, and the pipelines from Kirkuk. And now they are pumping. They started pumping also crude oil from Kirkuk to Ceyhan, fortunately, but with low capacity. So we have the experience to protect an energy infrastructure and the experience to protect also the straits, because also let's keep in mind that around 3 million barrels per day are crossing the Turkish straits. So it's altogether about 4+ million barrels of oil, crude oil, crossing Turkey. So it's such a big job, but we have the experience to do it. I hope that we can continue to do that. But with respect to the Mediterranean, Eastern Mediterranean, probably Brenda missed the opportunity, and I hope that you can do it, to talk about Cyprus. Because I understand that, and I have here my dear friend Yelda is here, and I understand that the ExxonMobil, together with Qatar Petroleum, are preparing to drill in Block 10. Have you started drilling, or will you be drilling? You started. So what would happen if, for example, ExxonMobil is going to strike gas and huge quantities of gas in Block 10? And who is going with so many shareholders and partners? Is ExxonMobil in a position, for example, to make a decision for investment before the problem of Cyprus, or before a final settlement is reached? Would such a good, for example, if you strike gas, would you encourage a settlement through the American administration? Because let's face it, because the Greek Cypriots started with unilateral actions, they were warned not to do it alone, because you see they regard themselves as the sole owner of the island, and it's not the case. They hijacked the state, and they were given the opportunity to behave as if they are the only sovereign entity in the island. It is not the case, because there is on the north, and everybody knows it, that there is a democracy, there is a community, and according to the principles agreed by the United Nations, also there is. I'm going to stop here. There is also yes.
I gave him a bit of a look.
The principles agreed by the United Nations and internationally, that there is a biocommunality and bizonality, the situation in Cyprus, and also the equal political partnership. So this is the case in Cyprus, and I hope that a final settlement, a comprehensive final settlement, will be encouraged by the energy resources, and then they will be fairly and equally, on equal basis, shared by the two communities, and we can do business with the Cypriots also.
Let me ask other members of the panel, one, if they want to respond to any of that, but also I would like to get back to the question whether there's any, and maybe, particularly Brenda and Sandra, and David, if you want to jump in, whether or not Turkish Stream, back to Turkish Stream, whether there is a risk of cannibalizing the TANAP and TAP, as well as potentially other gas resources, either from the Eastern Med or the Balkans off of Romania or Bulgaria?
So, I think in the first stage, Turkish Stream doesn't pose any threat to the Southern Gas Corridor, because those are real contracts, for 25 years, or signed contracts with committed gas buyers. So it's not, I think the timing is completely different. It could affect the second stage of development. There's huge untapped resources in Azerbaijan. There's potentially in the region, whether it's from East Med, Turkmenistan, other stages. So I think it could affect or compete with the second stage of development of those resources. But certainly in the first stage of the Southern Gas Corridor, it doesn't pose any risk. At the same time, I think more on the political, the political level, I think your point about, even the fact that Russia wants to build, to build this pipeline and the relationship with Turkey, I think on the geopolitical level, there's something more interesting. I think that a current focus of Russian foreign policy right now is actually U.S. allies. it's not actually their traditional allies or countries that are bordering Russian. So you see, for instance, a really big effort, to have a highly cooperative relationship with Saudi Arabia, with Turkey, with Egypt, even with Israel, which there's probably Prime Minister Netanyahu sees Putin more than he sees President Trump, and certainly on the phone. More actually trying to court Azerbaijan versus more traditional allies like Armenia in the region. So I think the fact that Russia is, I think that's something we really, with all the list of, it's even a partial list that that Ambassador Rende mentioned here of tremendous challenges globally, but specifically in and around Turkey. The U.S. and Turkey need a strong relationship, and no matter what the impediments have been, both of it need to see it as something that they really can't manage without. And I think that sort of the uptick in the relationship that's taken place since the fall, I think that's very positive. It's not just positive for Turkey and for the United States, but it's crucial for, I can't think of any way for anything positive to take place in the Middle East or Southern Europe or in deterring Russia without a strong Turkish-U.S. relationship. So it's good that those things are taking place. Just to add to Metet's list, I think that
how can you add to the list?
Well, I think, for instance, even something that can affect geopolitics and gas. If we take, for instance, North African gas into Europe as a given, but with the dislodging of most of the ISIS fighters from Iraq and Syria into Libya, you have a failed state that's become, the ISIS Disneyland there, and you're already seeing that. Can you imagine those rides? What they would look like? Okay, yeah. But you're already seeing the implication. There have been major attacks, including on energy facilities in Algeria. North Africa could be a completely different situation, and we need to prepare for that gas-wise. And Iran itself, today, another attack on a military installation in Baluchistan, again underreported by the U.S. media. There's really serious instability attacks taking place against government and military installations in Iran. Many of it from the ethnic minorities, whether it's Kurds, Baluch, Arabs, Azerbaijanis. It's going to be a big issue, and there could be an Iranian meltdown as well.
I'm going to give you the look now.
Oh,
and
okay.
Then we have Yemen, sir. We have Yemen.
Yemen.
We have
we could go on. And
we have the blockade.
Let
we have the blockade to Qatar,
Right.
sea and land and air blockade.
Well, we've now listed the 23 trouble spots within 500 miles of the Turkish border. I want David and Sandra to comment. Do you have a comment, David?
Go ahead,
and
Sandra.
Sandra, go ahead, and then David.
Sure. Well, I will start off since Brendan noted that we have, I think, historically spent more attention on Nord Stream 2 than on the second and potential other lines of Turkish Stream, to restate U.S. policy, which is that we are opposed for the exact same reasons to multiple lines of Turkish Stream, for the exact same reasons that we're opposed to Nord Stream 2. It is clearly designed to circumvent transit through Ukraine. It is potentially, I think, given the recent Russian attacks in the Sea of Azov, clearly a very delicate situation in Ukraine. The Ukrainian government views the ongoing gas transit as a break on Russian aggression in their own territory. And we believe that the pipeline projects, Nord Stream 2 project, Turkish Stream 2, and any Turkish Stream 3 or 4, would be detrimental both to Ukraine and to European energy security. Because, and this gets to your crowding out question, it wouldn't necessarily crowd out the Southern Gas Corridor volumes, which I agree with Brenda completely, are committed. They're contracted for.
At least at this stage.
At least at this stage. But what it would do is it would take away the incentive of the countries in Southern and Central Europe and the Balkans to make the investments in the energy security projects that are needed to completely link up that region, that sub-region, to provide what the third energy package calls for, with three forms of ingress, or three routes of ingress for gas. And I think that is core to why the United States views these infrastructure projects as so problematic. We view them as cementing in the current level of dependency, literally with cement and steel. So what also came up along with the sort of issue of Turkey being in a very difficult neighborhood is the question of the potential for what certainly the company hopes will be a major find off Cyprus. The United States supports the ability of countries to explore and produce resources in their exclusive economic zones. I will say, and I am not an oil company executive, so Yelda, correct me if I'm wrong, somewhere between 1 in 3 to 1 in 5 explorations like this come up with gas. So in the category of don't count your chickens before they're hatched, first there has to be gas. Then it will take years to bring that gas to market. It will take years before revenue actually flows from a find. And I think although there is maybe no peace pipeline, as Brenda has pointed out, perhaps there can be a peace find. And that the prospect of real commercial development of a valuable offshore resource will provide the impetus for a UN brokered, negotiated, comprehensive settlement that will allow for revenue sharing to both communities. Certainly, many other things have been tried in the past. This hasn't been. So it's worth trying. I think we are very encouraged. I've been working off and on this issue for the last several years, extremely encouraged by the gas trade between Israel and Jordan, by the prospect of reverse flowing the EMG pipeline, moving Israeli gas to Egypt, and then eventually either to the Egyptian domestic market or to liquefaction. When these concepts came up a few years ago, there were a lot of doubters. A lot of people said it's never going to happen. So I think there is an example close to home in the Eastern Med of regionally significant amounts of gas causing countries and communities that have not had a lot to cooperate on to find an area for real cooperation. And I'm hopeful that the same will be true for the people of Cyprus.
David, you have a comment?
I will just very briefly add that I think the way you framed your question, which is about the prospective cannibalization coming from Turkish Stream of Southern Energy Corridor, other supplies, presupposes, in some sense, that Turkey's gas demand trajectory is relatively fixed. And I will just bring up that there is one elephant in the room which impacts both renewables but also natural gas, which is what Turkey is going to do about coal for the next several decades. Turkey has about 80 coal plants in the pipeline. That's equivalent to is more or less the UK's entire power sector today. It's the third largest coal pipeline in the world after China and India. And though at first glance, it looks like a energy security imperative because Turkey has significant domestic supplies of coal, the fact is Turkey is importing about 40 million tons of coal per year because imported coal has 20 to 30% higher calorific value than its own domestic coal. And so its own domestic coal sector is heavily subsidized, allocation of free land, subsidized insurance, a variety of significant subsidies for electricity consumption for coal mining. So Turkey has a decision to make about in a world of fixed resources, particularly amidst challenging economic conditions, at least temporarily in the country. How does it want to allocate those subsidies? And were it to make the decision to support its domestic coal sector a little bit less, that might have knock-on effects for the share of coal consumption versus natural gas consumption in the decades out.
Thank you. I think, we only have about 20 minutes left. I think we should turn to the audience. I might mention we also have here my successor as ambassador to Azerbaijan, Bob Sakuda. We have Ambassador Shimony, who is Hungary's ambassador to NATO and to the US. I know there's at least one other company that I didn't mention who has stakes in the region, to wit Equinor, formerly Statoil. Our former deputy director, Tom Cunningham, is here from there. Maybe if I'm missing any other companies, let me know. Anyway, so can we have some questions from the audience? I see 2 hands, 3 hands. Okay, let's start with those 3. There, there, and there. Here, right here.
All sorts of hands.
And then Ariel's the 4th hand I saw. And 5th hand, David.
Thank you very much. My name is Paolo von Schirach. I'm the president of the Global Policy Institute. On the issue of renewables, obviously we're talking about, in a broader sense, of intensifying and improving bilateral relations between the United States and Turkey, in a broad sense, although obviously all these regional issues have been talked about. Given this great opportunity about solar energy, what's happening right now on the ground in terms of American companies? We are, after all, doing quite a bit in this country about solar energy. What is going on and what are the prospects? And the ancillary question is, what about China, which we haven't talked about here at all? By far the largest, most significant producer of low-cost solar technology. Are they active? Are they looking at Turkey? Are they active there? Are they our competitor, or are the competitors come from Europe or from elsewhere? It seems to me that given this great opportunity for renewables and being the, as you mentioned, the 2nd largest solar market, so to speak, in Europe, there should be droves of companies exploring and prospecting. Is that happening? Thank you.
Okay, let's take good questions. Let's take 3 questions, get answers, and then we'll go to a 2nd round. Hopefully, the 2 next hands I saw were there, yes, and then a person in the middle. Okay, why don't you and then we'll go.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I'll take next. My name is Henrik Vorleber. I'm an independent energy analyst and German, so I admit having a bias. My question is, again, about Nord Stream 2. I agree with Ms. Schäfer that we are talking. I visited several events recently, and Nord Stream 2 is always a topic. What isn't the topic is Nord Stream, and Nord Stream is already existent, the first pipeline since the collapse of the Soviet Union. And I would like to know, or to ask, the lessons learned so far from Nord Stream 1, where Russia is using it as a weapon, or separating the continent. Well, my opinion is different, that it's securing the energy security in Europe and help liberalizing the market. Thank you.
Okay, maybe when we get to it, you can respond in the 3rd question.
My name is Trey Taylor. I'm the founder of a New York-based damless hydropower company. And we've done resource assessments of Turkey, and there's at least a gigawatt of damless hydropower potential. I'm also serving my 9th year to the Secretary of Commerce in renewable energy and energy efficiency. One of the things we've been challenged here in the U.S. is to think outside the box. That goes with this current administration. Part of that is exporting hybrid and virtual power plants to places like Turkey. In other words, taking a nexus approach to build microgrids based on clean indigenous resources. That's thinking outside the box. So my question is, does Turkey have in mind an energy policy or plan to think this way? And I say that a bit tongue-in-cheek because the United States has never had an energy plan.
Okay, why don't we do this? David, why don't you respond first to the 1st and 3rd questions, and anybody else, Ambassador, if you want to jump in, and then you can respond to Nord Stream 2.
Favorite topic.
All of our favorite topics. Fortunately, it doesn't have that much to do with Turkey, but we'll answer the question anyway. Okay.
Excellent questions. So first and foremost, it absolutely is a hyper-competitive environment, particularly in solar in Turkey and particularly in onshore wind in Turkey. Chinese companies are extremely competitive in all of these auctions. They have been competing along with the likes of European developers, and then the biggest U.S. player that I know of so far is GE, having a major presence in Turkey. American companies, American renewable companies, should be leaning into Turkey more. The question is how we can help facilitate that, and particularly when you're going up against Chinese developers that oftentimes enjoy subsidized financing, right? So they're often able to have extremely aggressive bids in many of these auctions. Perhaps that is a role, of course, for a more robust presence of renewable energy and of clean energy in America's energy diplomacy apparatus. I would, personally believe that the time has come, the market has matured to the point where that's a geoeconomic imperative for the United States. There are though, we should say, Turkey is not a market without some uncertainties. And there are three major kind of headwinds that can be sorted out, but need to be sorted out if there's to be continued interest in Turkey, particularly from American players or from Western players. Number one, there are very high domestic content requirements, local content requirements, 60% local content, and in the case of a planned offshore wind development, 80% of the engineering personnel need to be Turkish. There's a trade-off here. Obviously, if you want renewable energy to be supported and to have a stable political economy base, you actually do want to develop some indigenous industry in Turkey. But you have to balance that against sometimes those high domestic content requirements, let's say crowding out some potential competition in auctions that you would have more of without those requirements. Secondly, the challenging financial environment. The weakness and the volatility of the Turkish lira over parts of this year has impacted the power sector more broadly. And obviously that is starting to settle down, but that has had an impact as well. So you need to see more currency stability. The government recently authorized foreign currency loans to developers of projects under 1 megawatt, these so-called unlicensed projects. So that's a step in the right direction, ensuring that there's still a flow of capital into the country to develop these projects. And then third, I would say just policy uncertainty. 2020 beyond, we have uncertainty over what the policy mechanism is going to look like, whether the current feed-in tariff system will persist. If I had to bet, and I have no idea what's going to happen, that I think you're going to see some feed-in tariffs go away for, let's say, relatively mature onshore wind and for solar, and feed-in tariffs of some sort remain for especially geothermal, potentially for offshore wind as well. But we need to see the Energy Ministry kind of announce what those are going to be. I know that they're working on that. I know that they are thinking about this in a very intelligent way. They are aware of what project developers need and where costs are in the market. And then that goes finally to your point. And one of the things that I know the Energy Ministry is in a information collecting phase on, but doesn't have a whole holistic policy around yet, is what is the role of digital energy solutions in all of this, and that plays into microgrids very well, right? So how do you have an integrated strategy that will draw on a variety of different clean energy sources of varying scales, those unlicensed under 1 megawatt, large utility scale projects, existing natural gas peaking plant capacity, let's say, or coal plant capacity, and then also how do you do things like demand response or create just a more flexible grid through digital solutions. They're, again, in the information gathering phase on that.
I just want to say, David, gosh, you've learned a lot about what's going on in Turkey while I wasn't looking.
It happened over Thanksgiving Day.
Thanksgiving.
I substituted one turkey for another.
Briefly, Ambassador Rindle.
I'm impressed by David's expertise, in fact, in the renewables. Yes, Turkey successfully implemented a mechanism called YEKDEM. It's called the Renewable Energy Sources Support Mechanism, based on feed-in tariff. And through this mechanism, many projects have been realized successfully. And also with the renewable energy resource zone, it's called this new, the ReZone. It's based on building the power plant or wind farms and solar plants, and then manufacture, as they would put it, the obligation to manufacture the equipment also, so that you can create jobs and help the small and medium the SMEs shortly to also be part of the process, and it's a kind of job creation. With respect to the question of the Northern Stream, recently we were invited to Berlin to the gas conference, the autumn gas conference, where Nord Stream 2 was widely discussed, and then with the presence of the Deputy Foreign Minister of Ukraine. So we had a lot of harsh exchanges, and analysts argued that the Nord Stream 2 is not compatible with the the third energy basket of the European Union. So it remains to be seen whether they will continue to challenge it or not.
Sandra, why don't you go to Nord Stream 2? Okay.
So I would say I'm going to reframe your question. I think a lot of people have heard me talk about Nord Stream 2 many times. So I'm going to talk about why Turkish Stream 1 is not a problem, okay? Turkish Stream 1 is designed to feed Istanbul's gas demand. Right. Rather like Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 1 feeds German gas demand. And in both cases, those markets are networked. They have alternate sources of supply for gas. They have alternate sources of supply for electricity coming from renewables, large-scale efficiency deployment. So they're not prone to economic or political coercion, right? So when we look at Turkish Stream 2 and Nord Stream 2, we look at pipeline projects that are clearly designed, first and foremost, to circumvent transit through Ukraine. It's not new gas, it's not additional gas, it's the same gas going by a different route. In any other situation in the world, we would not be saying redundant infrastructure is a bad thing. Redundant infrastructure adds resilience, it's helpful in case of storms or other sort of supply dislocations. In this case, it is clearly an effort by Moscow to exert political control over the government of Ukraine. And at the same time, because that gas is not destined, so the Nord Stream 2 gas is not destined for Germany. Germany will take between 5 and 9 BCM of a 55 BCMA pipeline. So a fairly minor amount. It's destined for the consumers who are already consuming the gas that transits through Ukraine, both whether coming down from the top or up from the bottom by a Turkish Stream 2. And what it will do is it will take the existing level of vulnerability and dependency that we have right now in Central and Southern Europe and the non-EU Balkans and cement it in place for another 30 to 40 years. And so what the United States sees here is an opportunity for those countries in that region to make a choice, to choose to, say LNG is too expensive right now, we don't want to build gasification plants, we're happy being on the end of hub and spoke infrastructure, or to say, now's the opportunity to really fulfill, and this is not US policy in many, many ways, this is EU policy. This is the EU Third Energy Package. We see how it has worked beautifully in Northwestern Europe. We see how it has worked very, very well in the Baltics. And our hope is that the same level of interconnectivity and networking and market impulses will cover all of Europe, so that the idea that one supplier could turn off the gas and cause the recipients on the other end to sort of look at February and a real problem to just not be there anymore. And I think in Northwestern Europe, the gas consumers, they're already there. There are a multiplicity of supplies, there are a lot of routes of ingress, and I would argue that the same is true in Turkey, and for all of the reasons that we've heard here. Renewable deployment, domestic coal, focus on efficiency, the volatile and troublesome neighbors who do happen to have a lot of gas, many of them. And so for that reason, we really don't view Nord Stream 2 and Turkish Stream 2 in the same light that we would view either the existing situation in Northwestern Europe or the situation with regard to the first line of Turkish Stream.
I think that was a really good explanation, and I would ask that we not talk any more about Nord Stream 2 today. That this is something that we have had 1,900 sessions on.
I did segue to Turkey, though.
No, you did, and you did answer the question, so I'm glad that you answered the question. But I'd like to keep away from further on Nord Stream 2, but I saw two other hands. Okay, I see three, and then we're going to call it off, responses and call it off. Ariel, is that David back there?
Alan
Makovsky. Yeah. Alan Makovsky.
Yeah.
Yeah, Alan. Right, sorry. And I say, and there was a question in here. Yeah. My eyes aren't so good, I'm an old guy. It's my 5th career.
Ariel Cohen, the Atlantic Council. The question to the ambassador, to our State Department, to Rhonda. Sort of twofold question. One is we saw today in the U.S., gas is at was it $4 for a million BTU, something like that? So pretty low. If you liquefy transport to Europe, that probably makes it, what, 7, something like that. Is it still competitive, the LNG, in the current market and looking forward a year, 2 years, 3 years? Would that LNG be competitive in Europe, taking into account the security premium that you want to pay for it? And a related question to our Turkish guest and others, it is a vital American interest to have Ukraine as a viable country. And Ukraine's dependence on Russian gas is pretty high, and Ukraine wants an LNG terminal on the Black Sea. I spent a year in 2014 trying to march that up.
Okay, so the
ahead.
question is whether
the question is,
going to get to
under
the
what
Bosphorus.
circumstances would Turkey agree for LNG, and to what extent the U.S. would help Ukraine to get LNG
we'll
into the Black Sea?
Ambassador Rinda's answer is the same as mine was the other day. Okay, Alan, and then the question up front, and then we'll have the last round of answers.
Thanks a lot, Alan Makovsky, Center for American Progress. Two quick questions. South Stream, as I understand it, I'm not an expert, was basically ruled out by the EU, I think for competition reasons. Why would a pipeline going to Bulgaria or Greece into the EU from Turkey be conceptually any different? And second of all, that's for anyone. And for Ambassador Rinda, I just wanted to clarify, you can tell me if my premise is wrong, but I know Turkey has a rather, does not recognize a coastal shelf of islands, and therefore has rather, what most people view as rather expansive EEZ claims in the Mediterranean. I wanted to ask specifically, is the Block 10 of the Republic of Cyprus as auctioned to ExxonMobil and Qatar Gas, is that part of the Turkish claims, EEZ claims?
Okay, we've had 3 sets of, oh no, we haven't had yours, sorry. And then we are past 3:30. We'll have a brief response from the panel members.
Great, well, thank you. I'm Jennifer Miel with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, U.S. Turkey Business Council. I have 2 quick questions. One's on the Iran sanctions waiver and what your thoughts are if Turkey needs to continue to reduce its supply of both oil and potentially natural gas, and how some of the surrounding competing sources price may affect Turkey's economy moving forward, just given the price sensitivity there. And then the second question, one point that we haven't brought up today is about the U.S.-Turkey collaborations on some of the refineries, specifically the Star Refinery in Izmir through SOCAR. A lot of U.S. technology went into that, and it's a great partnership model for the future. So what do you see as refinery capacity in Turkey moving forward? Thank you.
Okay, there are basically 6 questions, so let's get some, basically get some quick responses.
First of all, about...
Okay, why don't each of you respond to what questions you want to respond to?
Okay, as regards the competitive nature of LNG, we need to import LNG, and I hope the U.S. will be able to be competitive. The reason why we need in our energy basket a certain amount of energy, and perhaps 20% of our energy of gas consumption should come from LNG, because we would like to enhance our demand elasticity, and through LNG you can, not through pipeline gas. So if worse comes to worse, you need to store LNG and then use it at the peak demand periods. And also if, for example, there will be an interruption as a result of explosion or any other activity, then you need also to have a certain amount of LNG stored in your facilities. So this is why we will continue to buy LNG. But whether the US LNG will be able to compete with the Qataris or the North African LNG, it remains to be seen. I think it's up to the Americans to be more forthcoming with respect to their prices. The second question is more important, the LNG terminal of Ukraine. I have also dealt with with this matter when I was also the Director General responsible for energy affairs and global affairs. The Turkish people are so sensitive because the Turkish Strait, and especially the Bosphorus, is considered to be the Champs-Élysées of Istanbul. So and we had too many explosions during which 22 sailors, for example, died. And then if we think about just another disaster, and many experts, they say that a disaster is a matter of time. It's waiting. It will happen one day. And there's no damage control. If something to happen, a disaster, you can't do damage control in the Straits. And therefore they are so sensitive, and we're trying to convince also the Ukrainians that let's be part of your solution. Turkey would like to be part of the solution, but not through LNG tankers through the Bosphorus and the Straits.
Your answer on that was a very good, well thought out answer, somewhat longer than my answer to Ariel the other day, which was no.
No.
Okay.
About the coastal shelf, I can come later. About the Block 10.
Okay, very briefly. Yeah.
Very briefly, the Block 10 is out of the declared Turkey's declared continental shelf. We made it clear that where they declared the blocks of the Greek Cypriots, 4 of them, they overlap the Turkish declared continental shelf, and we made it clear that Turkey will not, under any circumstances, allow drilling activities in these areas. And the 10 is close to, very close to Zor, so it's in the southwest of the island, so it's not part of the Turkish side. But the Turks have already acquired a deep sea drilling vessel, and they are trying also to drill. And if they strike gas in these overlapping areas, probably it will be a game changer also, because we talked about game changers. One of them, if, for example, ExxonMobil would strike gas in 10. I don't know if the Turkish government has already warned, because probably the Turkish government has already approached ExxonMobil to tell them that they should not do it. But at the same time, they are also drilling, and we will drill probably in the overlapping areas. And if they strike gas, it will be really a game changer. Thank you.
Very briefly, if you have anything.
Yes, I'll focus on the question about Turkish-Iranian gas trade. I think it's something that there's a variety of issues that are at play here with the potential ratcheting up of U.S. sanctions. And again, I think you probably could hear this from Sandra more, but key with the waivers is that it's temporary, and that's the key word, and that things are going to really change. And so, one, with this round of U.S. sanctions, in contrast to the Obama administration applying to condensate, this can affect Iran's gas production, because their condensate is a byproduct of the gas production. So we may see in the future Iran having no ability to store all its produced condensate, and therefore having to reduce its gas production. This would affect its domestic gas supplies, but also could affect its gas supplies to Turkey and Armenia, and Iraq is already, they're not stable as it is. But so Turkey and Armenia, which are the main importers of Iranian gas, could find themselves with erratic supplies. And this isn't new. Actually, Iran, traditionally is a very poor supplier to Turkey, both the quality of the gas, and also when there's gas shortages in Iran, they tend not to supply this contracted volume. So again, the sanctions on the condensate, one of the byproducts might be an inability for Iran to continue its domestic gas production at current levels. Additional element could be also the payment element with the ratcheting up of sanctions, that Turkey, even if there isn't an explicit sanction on natural gas, there might not be a mechanism that Turkey could actually pay for this gas. And I think this will be an extremely sensitive issue in light of the fact in the previous round of sanctions that the gas was used as a sanction buster, and all the legal, there are legal implications. So I think that this won't be, attempted again if it's and the other thing that also could be an explicit sanction sanction on natural gas trade. I mean, we're already seeing, for instance, the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad has been trying to help Iraq prepare for, the day when Iranian gas won't be arriving to the market. So it seems like there could be a next stage where there would be explicit sanctions on natural gas. But even without, just the condensate issues and the payment issues are already going to complicate Iranian gas sales to Turkey.
Okay, that's it.
That's it?
That's it.
Okay.
We've got to finish. Unless you have something really critical in 10 seconds.
Just 10 seconds. Again, going back to the Cyprus on some of these issues here, that I like Sandra's vision about how within an island itself, 2 places, maybe this could be a new tool. Let's also, U.S. diplomacy should be working on conflict prevention, because if you hear from a lot of the things that we've been talking here, there's just as much propensity for all-out conflict as there is for something good. So.
David, do you have any further?
Nope, I'm good.
Oh, thank you. Okay, Sandra, you've got the last word.
Okay, so I'll start with LNG prices and U.S. exports. So the role of the U.S. government is to help U.S. gas producers find the best possible price, whether that is in Asia or Europe or Latin America. So our gas exports, U.S. gas exports, will chase price globally, and the U.S. government will support them. So underlying prices may be different. Lots of questions about Iran, so I'll address them. So first off, what we have in place against Iran is a maximum pressure campaign. The sanctions that were reimposed on November 5th should be viewed as a floor, not a ceiling. So currently, Turkish gas imports from Iran comport with the sanctions regime, but there are the challenges that Brenda highlighted. The Iranian crude oil importers, the 6 jurisdictions that are still importing Iranian crude oil that have the SREs, our goal is to get those crude oil imports to 0 as soon as possible. And given a well-supplied global crude oil market, all of the importers should look to diversify it away from Iran as quickly as possible.
Is that it?
That's it.
Okay, well, we're 10 minutes over. That's sort of like the extra time in a football match. Anyway, thank you all very much. Thank you to the panel. It was a great panel. Thank you for some excellent questions. So let's give the panel a hand.
Dick Morningstar, thank you very much. Thank you. And I'd like to thank to our panelists once more and all the audience. Thank you for being here today. And I really applaud this very fruitful discussion. Thank you so much.